Okay, thank you everyone for joining us. Um, Tonight we're going to talk about special education policy or impacting special education policy and making your voices heard. And we appreciate you signing up for this session and taking time out to join us for, watching the recorded session as well as joining us later on in March for the live session on Zoom. So, my name is Carrie Potter, and I am an educational support coach with Family Matters Parent Training and Information Center. And um, I'll be your presenter throughout this recorded webinar. And I do want to clarify that Family Matters Parent Training Information Center does not provide any form of legal service. So, we can't give any form of legal advice or information, assistance, anything like that. So, any information gained from this presentation should not be considered as such. So tonight we're going to start off by talking about special education policy. And it's really important to understand special education policy if you're really wanting to pursue advocating for those for changes within special education policy. So just keep in mind that tonight we want you to gain or be familiar with special education policy so that you're able to use appropriate language when you're speaking with legislators. Knowing the appropriate language to use is going to help you to ask for the specific changes that you would like to see made in IDEA or the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. So keep in mind that during this training, any slides that are in white are going to focus on what is in IDEA or the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act currently or right now. And then any slides that are in blue are going to focus on what changes you might like to see in IDEA. So, and again, keep in mind that only federal regulations are going to be reported on these slides, but there may be differences between federal regulations and state guidance or regulations. So just keep that in mind. It's important to know, like when you're advocating for change, what's in federal, but also knowing what's in state regulations, just so you know that, maybe you're advocating for something, you see something in federal regulations and you don't realize that state chooses to do better. And we'll discuss some of that throughout this presentation. So prior to 1975, there was no special education law. So that meant that at least 1 million children with disabilities were excluded from schools. Um, States could refuse children to attend school. They may have IQ limits put in place to determine who would be allowed to attend school, and schools did not have to provide students with disabilities services. So just a little Q&A, some questions to consider, just to test your knowledge. Do you know which state allowed schools to prohibit children with disabilities from attending? And I'll give you just a second to think that over. Out of all the states, which had a law prohibiting students with disabilities from attending? That would be Maryland, is the answer. The second question that I have is, what was the first state to have special education law? And the answer to that would be Massachusetts. They were the first state to provide services. So we're going to watch a little video.
I answer 6.
The neurologist said, if you're planning to have other children and you want a normal life, maybe you should institutionalize them.
The school committee member said, "We do not educate a vegetable."
She's not going to be able to read, she's not going to be able to do many things, she's not going to be able to live independently.
We had families, parents particularly, who came to talk with social workers about the fact that their children were being bounced out of the Boston public school system. The school system was saying that the youngster was too retarded, too disturbed. In many cases, the school was too dysfunctional to really do the job.
We wanted to integrate him very early, but we knew that it was very difficult. It just did not work.
Something has to be done about it systemically.
They were seeing children who simply weren't going to school for any number of reasons, and Huey and others resolved to gather together.
There has been evidence of young people excluded from school illegally. We got from the school department what we knew we would get, and that was denial. I think maybe what we ought to do is form a task force on children out of school. We decided to have kind of a quasi-public hearing to which we invited school officials to testify to the task force. And some of it was like unbelievable. We're beginning to get radicalized. We're beginning to get angry.
So they'll have the same opportunities of every child who's educated in this country.
Across the front page of the Boston Globe was this message: 10,000 young people are excluded from the Boston public schools. The community was shocked. What you're doing is taking a social condition that is horrendous, that most people don't know about, and you're lifting that condition up to becoming a social problem. And we use it to go up to public officials and say, look, something has to be done. The Speaker of the House, David Barkley, called us and said, will you please send me 500 copies of The Way We Go to School?
It was an opportunity to give kids a chance. That's what we were all really about.
He got the 500 copies, he sent it to the legislature, he sent it to groups in the community that he was affiliated with and aligned with. And then he called us in to say, okay, I want to write some new legislation. Would you work with us? Then the Task Force on Children Out of School, which later became Mass Advocates for Children, members of our board and team and groups we were aligned with, sat down and worked with him and his staff to create Chapter 766. It is the greatest piece of educational legislation in the history of the Commonwealth. Basically helped bring thousands of young people out of classes for the retarded that were, out of the mainstream of the school, youngsters who were handicapped, who were not being, served in schools. It got people to think about, and educators to think about, how do you educate all children together?
Teachers learned that there were different learning styles, and that by modifying curriculum and adapting approaches for special education children, it also was good for typically developing children as well.
And it was a sense of empowerment and entitlement that Chapter 766 said every child must have an education. So whenever we sat down, we knew whoever we were talking to, they had to educate him, they had to accept him, they had to work with him.
Education, as you know, is so much the key to anybody's success. And for these children who had been denied an education, and would have been denied education, it was a lifesaver and a godsend for them and their families.
Chapter 766 has helped us tremendously.
I'm going to use my son again for an example. So here's a kid that was given every opportunity in education. He now has his own business. He gets support in his business. He has a driver's license.
Those laws have put us as equal members of the student body and has allowed us to have voices and to be seen and to be heard.
Because of Chapter 766, my brother Sadie has the same opportunities that I do.
When I grow up, I want to be an actress on Disney Channel.
I am now onto my next challenge, which is to become a vocational rehabilitation counselor.
My favorite subject in school is math.
I like to read.
My teachers, they're pretty good. I mean, they help me.
I got all A's, I did really well socially, I was supported with interpreters, I had DOT, and that just made everything in my life easier.
We are Chapter 766.
I am Chapter 766.
I am 766.
We are Chapter 766.
I am Chapter 766.
We are Chapter 766.
I am Chapter 766.
We are Chapter 766.
We are Chapter 766.
I am 6.
Okay, so we've had a chance to watch this video and we're going to move ahead because we still have a lot to get through. So on November 29th of 1975, President Ford signed into law the Education for All Handicapped Children Act. That's also known as Public Law 94-142. Or the EHA. And the EHA guaranteed a free appropriate public education, or FAPE, to each child with a disability in every state and locality across the country. The act became effective in 1977, and this was the first special education law. So before EHA, many children were denied access to education and opportunities to learn. So in 1970, U.S. schools educated only 1 in 5 children with disabilities, and many states had laws excluding certain students, including children who were deaf, blind, had emotional disturbance, or had an intellectual disability. So the premises of EHA, or the Education for All Handicapped Children, was to their premises included FAPE, which again is free appropriate public education, which is still required now, and was even required during COVID, during remote learning and all of that. Premises also included least restrictive environment, or you may hear of it referred to with the acronym LRE, and also procedural safeguards. So, there were different purposes to EHA that included to assure that all children with disabilities have available to them a free appropriate public education, which emphasizes that special education and related services are designed to meet the student's unique needs. And also, to assure the effectiveness of efforts to educate all children with disabilities. And under IDEA, public schools are required to provide each child with a disability with a free appropriate public education in the least restrictive environment at no cost to the child's parents. So IDEA reauthorizations, by law, it says that Congress must reauthorize this legislation every 5 years. And so you can see years that amendments have been made. The most current would be 2004. And so we're in 2024 now. And some examples of amendments that have been made over the years. So on this slide, you're going to see just different examples of the amendments that have been made. So in 1990, you can see that handicap was changed to disability in an amendment. So handicap changed to disability because that's now the politically correct term to use, as well as the term desired by many advocacy groups and self-advocates. You can also see that autism and traumatic brain injury were added in an amendment in 1990. And then you can see new related services include assistive technology and rehabilitation counseling in 90. Mandated transition services were included in 1990. And you can see that regular education teacher is a member of the IEP team or included as a member of the IEP team in 1997. And so you can read through, this handout and this slide and read all of the different amendments that took place over time. So in this slide, this is one of the first slides where we might start thinking about different changes that could be made. When you're thinking about, who does IDEA serve, it might help you think about, what changes could be made. So Part B serves children aged 3 through 21 at the federal level. And like we said, federal and state may differ. So in Illinois, if you look at Illinois Administrative Code 226.50, it allows special education students to continue attending school through the end of the school year in which they turn 22. So our state guidelines are different than federal guidelines. Federal guidelines say that Part B serves children ages 3 through 21. But in Illinois, we're saying that students can continue attending school through the school year in which they turn 22. So again, it's important to compare what you see in federal regulations to state regulations. Part C covers or serves children 0 to 3 or birth to 3. So again, on this slide, this is a blue slide. So we've talked about what's currently in IDEA in different areas. And now we're going to talk about, on this slide, you'll consider what changes might you want to see made. So, do you have changes that you'd like to see made in the type of disability? So there's different disabilities that students can be eligible, that can allow students to be eligible. So do you want to consider adding gifted students? Is that something you want to advocate for to be added to federal regulations? An age of an individual with a disability. So for example, would you like to see federal regulations match what our state regulations say? You could advocate for changes to the ages served that are mandated to be served in the federal regulations, or you could think of other issues as well. But these are just some things to consider. And you could just look at, what we've discussed and think about what changes do I want to see? Are any of these of concerns to me? And what would I like to see implemented differently? So for eligibility, when you look at federal guidelines, to be eligible, a student must meet the 3 requirements below. And again, this is federal. So a student must have one of the 13 disability categories. They must be eligible under one of those 13 disability categories listed in federal regulations. The disability must adversely affect educational performance, and that student must require special education services. So again, we said state and federal differ. So federal eligibility, if you look at that guidance, there are 13 disability categories. And if you look at Illinois guidelines, there are 14 categories. So Illinois includes all of the 13 that are listed in federal, but Illinois also has a category titled developmental delay as a disability or eligibility category. And then looking at evaluations, if you look at what federal guidelines or regulations say about evaluations by a public school, federally, each school has 60 days to do an evaluation. In Illinois, if you look at 23 Illinois Administrative Code 226.110, it says that once you say yes to testing and sign consent, the school has 60 school days to test your child and have a meeting to discuss if your child's eligible for services or special education. So, and it says that if you ask for an evaluation with less than 60 school days left in the school year, that the team has to complete that evaluation. If they're in agreement, would have to complete that evaluation over the summer or before the following school year. So again, Illinois differs from what federal says. Federal says 60 days and Illinois says 60 school days. And then the school does need your consent to complete an evaluation. And when you sign consent, that triggers timeline. And then reevaluations can occur every 3 years. And so those are some things that are in federal guidelines. And if you look at section 226.120 about reevaluations, what Illinois says is procedures for the completion of reevaluation of children for whom special education and related services are currently being provided shall conform to the requirements listed in federal regulations, as well as section 226.110. So it kind of refers to federal regulations, but also refers to the Illinois Administrative Code that we discussed. Federal regulations talk about independent educational evaluations that can be paid for by the school. Do not need to choose the evaluator chosen by the school, so the parent has the option to choose an evaluator, and then the school needs to consider the evaluation but does not need to accept it. Those are things to think about, are those of concern to you? So again, we've covered some different things about IDEA, and you want to think about, do I have concerns about the evaluation process? Do I have concerns about meeting timelines, evaluation timelines? So if federal say 60 days from the time you sign consent for evaluation, that the federal says you have 60 days to complete the process, but Illinois guidelines say you have 60 school days, Illinois guidelines take longer. Do you have concerns? This is something that you would want to consider advocating about. Do you have concerns about getting evaluations ahead of time? In Illinois, currently, you do get evaluations ahead of an IEP meeting, things like that. You could look at the time frame and think, do I feel like families need more time, like to get those sooner than what's currently written into Illinois guidance? And then just think about what concerns do you have about evaluations. Look at what's currently in federal regulations, look at what your state says, and think about, how do I want to advocate for change and amendments to IDEA? So IEP team members meetings have required members. So the parents or caregivers are invited. Federal regulations say that you can invite whomever you want, and then at least one general education teacher, one special education teacher, and then an LEA representative, a student if they're transition age to be invited, and then an interpreter of evaluation results, and at the discretion of parents or agency, other individuals with knowledge or special expertise of the child regarding the child. So, and we talk about a student can be invited or they're supposed to be invited at transition age. If you look at federal regulations cite transition age as 16. In Illinois, we say that the transition age starts the year and a student turns 14 and a half. When that IEP is written for the year that student turns 14 and a half, then they should be invited to their meeting. And then federal regulations say that a member of the IEP team may be excused from attending an IEP meeting if their area of curriculum or service will not be discussed or modified during that meeting, or if the meeting involves their area of curriculum or service they can submit input in writing prior to the meeting, and the parent and the school can consent. So this is what's in the federal regulations. So basically, like if a speech therapist maybe their area isn't going to be gone over at a meeting, then they wouldn't necessarily have to be at a meeting, or if maybe their input is needed, they could ask to have consent to miss a meeting and provide input prior to the meeting. So you want to think about what concerns you have about the composition of your IEP team. Who is a part of the IEP team, and who are individuals. We discussed the individuals who are supposed to attend a meeting, but who are individuals who do not attend a meeting? A lot of times students have paraprofessionals, so maybe a concern would be that paraprofessionals may not often be allowed to attend a meeting. Is this somebody that you feel like should be required to attend a meeting? And can you advocate for that change or amendment to IDEA to include them as a member of the IEP team? And do you have concerns about individuals who, don't attend meetings or may have to leave early, things like that, and what the guidelines say currently? And do you have anything, that you would like to advocate for amendments to regarding students attending their own IEP meetings? Do you feel like, students should attend earlier than transition age, or be encouraged to, build familiarity with IEP meetings from a younger age so that they're more comfortable with it as they get older? So these are just things that to think about. What are your concerns? What do you want to advocate for to have it amended? Now we're going to talk about IEPs and present levels. So present levels are kind of where that student is right now, where they are today. So IDEA requires that IEPs include statements regarding the child's present levels of academic achievement and functional performance. And so this should include quantitative or measurable data, and it's a snapshot of where that child is right now, today, what they're capable of doing, what their strengths are, their areas of difficulty, kind of, should give you an overall snapshot of what their abilities are right now. So the term functional refers to non-academic skills and is often used in the context of routine activities of everyday living. So we're going to look at some different present levels, and you can just think about, are these good present levels? Are they appropriate? Are they not? The first one says, Michaela is a third grade student. She can rote count 1 through 10 without any prompting with 100% accuracy. And using touch math, she can add one-digit numbers without any assistance with 90% accuracy. She requires a verbal prompt to complete addition with two-digit numbers. With the verbal prompt, Michaela can complete the problem accurately 75% of the time. So this is a very detailed present level. It gives you a really clear picture of where Michaela is at currently. It's a snapshot of her abilities right now and where she is at this moment in time. If we read the second bullet pointed present level, it says, Michaela has a beautiful smile. She is such a pleasure to work with. She is a very cute little girl. This present level doesn't really tell us, what Michaela is doing. It doesn't have that measurable data to show us where she's at right now and what her ability level is and what she needs to work on. So, this is kind of the difference between a really specific present level and one that's very vague. IEPs must include a statement of measurable annual goals, including academic and functional goals. Again, we said functional or non-academic areas. So you must be able to count or measure whether the child has achieved the goal. We want to know, is that child making progress toward that goal that's written into the IEP? So let's look at some goals and look at, do you think the following goals are good or bad? Are they measurable? Are they specific? Are they not? So the first one is Jason will learn to read. That's a very vague goal. It doesn't tell us, where Jason is at currently, what grade level or reading level he's at, anything like that. It doesn't give you kind of a baseline to build a measurable goal off of. The second goal listed here says Chloe will decrease echolalic responses by reliably answering simple yes/no questions with 80% accuracy for 3 consecutive days by 6/1/22. So this one tells you, what Chloe is going to do and by when and at what percent of accuracy. So this one is very specific. The third goal tells us Sarah will sit still. But we really don't know any more details than that. It doesn't give us, information about, it's not measurable, I guess. We don't know anything about Sarah and how she's going to sit still or, how often she's not sitting still. You know, we don't know where she's at currently. The fourth one says Michael will improve his functional academics in the area of reading by reading a grade level passage aloud with less than 5 errors for 5 consecutive days by 6/1/22. And this is pretty specific. The only thing I can think is maybe we don't know what grade level Michael's at. So I guess we're, you know, want to know what grade level is he in. So we know if he's in 5th grade, maybe it could say that he would read at a 5th grade level passage. Okay, so tracking progress. An IEP has to contain a description of how the child's progress toward the annual goals will be measured and when periodic reports on the progress the child is making, such as through the use of quarterly or periodic reports, will be provided. So a lot of schools are on a quarterly schedule, so every quarter progress reports are sent out. So other schools might do trimesters, things like that. So you want to look at how often those reports are being sent out, but progress reports on towards annual goals should be sent out periodically. So when you think about goals and reports of progress, things like that, what concerns do you have? You know, do you have things that you would like to see amended according to what the federal regulations say about goals and progress reports? Do you feel like, progress is reported often enough or frequently enough according to federal regulations, things like that? Those are things that you could look into, advocating for amendments to IDEA for. So when you think about related services could include things like speech therapy, occupational therapy, things like that. The federal regulations say that a projected beginning date for services, modifications, and the anticipated frequency, location, and duration of those services would be included in the IEP. And then for research, based interventions, IDEA in 2004 added a new requirement that IEPs include a statement of special education and related services and supplemental aids and services based on peer-reviewed research to the extent practicable. The department's longstanding position on including instructional methodology in a child's IEP is that it is an IEP team's decision. Therefore, if an IEP team determines that specific instructional methods are necessary for the child to receive FAPE or free appropriate public education, then the instructional methods may be addressed in the IEP. So you can see commentary and federal regulation or the Federal Register on this. So when you're thinking about related services or research interventions, you could think about, do I have concerns about research-based intervention? Can that be included in the IEP? Do I want to see it specify who provides it? Things like that. What concerns do you have when you think about the way related services are approached or documented in the IEP? Currently, we talked about least restrictive environment a little bit, and the legal definition of least restrictive environment says that to the maximum extent appropriate, children with disabilities, including children in public or private institutions or other care facilities, are educated with children who are not disabled. It's not necessarily saying inclusion, but it's saying to the maximum extent appropriate that children with disabilities, including children in public and private institutions or other care facilities, are educated with children who are not disabled. So we're going to look at the LRE, or least restrictive environment continuum, and this shows that it starts with considering the regular education classroom. Then the next placement on the continuum would be a resource classroom, then part self-contained, and then self-contained classroom. The next down the continuum would be day school, then residential school, and then homebound. Also want to look at disproportionality and placement. So the National Council on Disabilities in 2018 IDEA series focused on the segregation of students with disabilities and increased inclusion for all racial and ethnic categories, said that disparities persist. And so in looking at this information, it shows that white students and Native American students are included in the general education classrooms more often than Black or African American students, Asian students, and those from the Pacific Islands, including Hawaii. And then it also noted that Black or African American and Hispanic students with disabilities were more likely to be placed in a substantially separate setting compared to white students, regardless of income status. And then other research shows us that Maine sees more disproportionality with ELL students, and ELL students tend to be pulled out more because inclusive interventions are not widely used. So when you're thinking about amendments you would like to see made to IDEA, you could think about number of students in the classroom. Do you have concerns in this area? Do you have concerns about qualification of professionals? Do you have concerns about amount of time spent in classroom, or disproportionality in placement, or other concerns? You know, really think about what concerns that you have in all of these areas, and if there's something that you want to advocate for change for. So we're going to look at transition. So again, we talked a little bit about this previously, but federal regs currently state that transition plan would be implemented for a student at the age of 16. Again, in Illinois, we say that a transition plan will be created the year that an IEP is in place, the year that a student turns 14 and a half. So the age of transition is 14 and a half in Illinois. So that differs again from federal regulation. And then the federal regs say that it should include vocational assessments, and you look to the future and prepare for it with vocational training, independent living skills. Federal regulations talk about dating classes, employment training, post-secondary education, like college, things like that. Other agencies should be included, like vocational rehab, Social Security, self-advocacy groups, centers for independent living can be included according to federal regulations. So again, you want to think about transition and what concerns do you have? Transition plan federally is implemented at 18. We say 14 and a half in Illinois. So do you have concerns about that? Do you have concerns about vocational assessments, looking to the future? Really think about what are your concerns in the area of transition and what changes would you like to see made? So we also want to talk about discipline. So according to federal regulations, parents should receive oral or written notice of what a student is accused of doing and the reasons for the accusations, and an explanation of the evidence upon which changes are based. Parents should have school complete an FBA, or a functional behavior assessment, before a BIP, or behavior intervention plan. And then it also says a team meeting to evaluate the relationship between a student's disability and his or her behavior so that students with disabilities are not denied services because of misbehavior that could have been anticipated and prevented. So you have to look at the relationship between that student's disability and their behavior to see if there is a relation there, determine that. So a manifestation determination review, or an MDR, is required when a discipline sanction could result in a change of placement. And then the federal regs also state that there can be a 45-day removal. And this, if a student carries a weapon to school, possesses or uses drugs, or inflicts serious bodily injury, then there can be a unilateral removal to an interim alternative educational setting for up to 45 school days without a manifestation determination. So the federal regs are saying basically if one of these things happen, then that placement change can be made up to 45 days, school days, without holding a manifestation determination. So we want to talk about discipline disparities. Students with versus without disabilities are 2 times more likely to receive an out-of-school suspension, and Black students with disabilities are 3 times as likely as white students with disabilities to be suspended, and 2.5 times as likely to be expelled. And then students with versus without disabilities are more likely to experience seclusion or involuntary confinement and physical restraint. And then while students with disabilities make up just 12.6% of the student population, they represent 66% of those placed in seclusion. And then Native American and Black students with disabilities are most likely to be restrained and secluded. So you want to think about what concerns you may have with discipline. Do you have concerns about a 45-day removal? And that not recognizing the effect of the disability, and manifestation determination, not needing to be held in that situation? Do you have concerns about loss of services during suspension or expulsion? And then, do you have concerns with discipline disparities, the differences between, how discipline is handled amongst different students? So, or think about what other concerns you may have and what you may want to advocate for to have amended in IDEA. We also want to talk about dispute resolution options. So federal regs talk about state complaints and mediation, where a school can bring an attorney. Parents can as well, but a school can bring an attorney. Due process hearing, a resolution meeting, a school can only bring an attorney if a parent has an attorney. So those are things, to be familiar with. And then to think about what concerns do you have about dispute resolution. Um, as a parent, if a school can bring an attorney to a meeting and you'd like to have one, are there an abundance or a lack of special education attorneys in the state? Are there a lack of pro bono attorneys? Having an attorney can be costly. So do you have concerns about this and access to attorneys and, access according to finances, things like that? Do you think resolution meetings should be stricter or have stricter guidelines? Do you have concerns about the reading level and accessibility of procedural safeguards? Things like that. Think about what concerns you have regarding dispute resolution and what changes or amendments you might like to advocate for. So let's talk about federal funding of IDEA. So in 1975, Congress said that the federal government would fund 40% of all special education expenses. So just how much do you think the federal government pays now? Do you think that that's increased since 1975? I looked this up today and we are still, federal government is still funding IDEA at 40%. And so nothing has changed since 1975. So thinking about that, is there an issue with funding? Is this something you feel like 40% is an okay percentage? Do you feel like there needs to be a higher percentage of funding? That's just something that you could consider. If that's of concern to you, is this something that you want to advocate for? So let's talk about the last IDEA reauthorization in 2004 and discuss what changes you would have suggested. So what concerns do you have about each of these changes? Transition is mandated at age 16. Do you have a concern with that? Think about states can make short-term objectives optional, and there's a 60-day timeline for evaluations. Do you have concerns with that? Surgically implanted devices and related services that schools don't have to pay for, resolution meetings, requiring highly qualified teachers in special education, a pilot project to reduce paperwork burden only to the IEP in progress or reports of progress, and then pilot project 3-year IEPs. Do you have concerns about any of these changes that have been made in 2004? We want to look at a timeline for IDEA 2004 reauthorization. So if you look at this, in December of 2004, President Bush signed the statute. And in June 2005, proposed regulations were released and a comment period began, and that was 610 pages. Then there was a 60-day comment period. And then in September of 2005, the comment period ended. And then in August of 2006, the final regulations were released and addressed each comment. And so then after that, state regulations then need to be developed as well. So I'm going to look at some definitions. Statute says it's shorter, it's less than 100 pages usually, it's a document that cannot be changed. Proposed regulation is longer, it's 600 pages usually, and it's a document that can be changed, and it cannot be completely different from statute. And then final regulations are longer, typically like 600 pages, and it's a document that cannot be changed. So that ends our session for tonight. We again appreciate you joining us for this recorded virtual session. If you have questions, you can contact Family Matters. Our direct number is 866 782, or wait, sorry. Our direct number is 866-436-7842. So if you have any questions, you can contact our office and ask for more information. Again, we appreciate your participation and look forward to seeing you during the live session in March.